A red warning light begins flashing inside the habitat. Outside the window, nothing appears to be happening. That is the problem. The horizon stays still. The dust barely moves. The sky shows no sign of danger. For a few seconds, the alarm feels wrong. Then you remember where you are. On Mars, the most dangerous conditions rarely announce themselves. Mars has no thick atmosphere wrapped around it. No global magnetic shield like the one protecting Earth. Above that quiet landscape, space is much closer than it looks. The surface is calm. The exposure is not... A suit lock opens. Boots touch the ground. The sky hangs overhead as a faint layer of color. Less like weather and more like a stain spread between your body and the darkness beyond. Nothing presses against you. Nothing burns. Yet protection is already being spent. Every step outside starts a countdown that cannot be seen. NASA radiation measurements have shown that the Martian surface receives far more radiation than people experience on Earth. The danger arrives without wind, without sound, without any visible warning beyond the one blinking behind you. The contradiction is unsettling. The landscape looks peaceful enough to walk across. Meanwhile, cells inside the body are absorbing damage. Electronics inside equipment accumulate tiny failures. Both continue quietly while the plane remains unchanged. Dust slides across a sealed window. The warning light keeps blinking. And every minute outside now has to be counted. Rover tracks cut across the dust, stretching away from the habitat until the shelter becomes a pale shape against the horizon. The warning light is gone now. Nothing flashes. The danger travels with you. Inside the rover, fans hum steadily. Air circulates through filters. Status screens remain green. It feels organized, controlled. For a while, the movement almost feels reassuring. Then, the distance starts growing. The habitat shrinks behind a veil of red dust, and something subtle changes. Every meter forward increases the time required to return. Oxygen reserves become travel calculations. Cooling systems become travel calculations. Battery life becomes travel calculations. Exploration begins turning into accounting. NASA mission planning has long treated the Martian surface as a balance of limits: radiation, power, distance, temperature, dust. They accumulate. The strange part is that driving feels like progress. The wheels keep turning. New ground appears. The landscape opens ahead. Yet physically, safety is getting smaller.
All systems nominal on the
A failed seal would not happen beside the habitat anymore.
Standard flow.
A cooling problem would happen hours away. Even a simple delay changes the return trip. Every system inside the rover continues working. Every system is also being spent. Behind you, a pair of narrow tracks stretches back toward a habitat that now looks much farther away than it did when the drive began. Dust continues moving across the ground long after the rover stops. Above it, a pale sky hangs over the landscape. It looks familiar for a moment. There is a horizon. There is air. There are shadows crossing the surface. But the sky is not doing the job a sky is supposed to do. If your helmet vanished here, breathing would become impossible almost immediately. Pressure would collapse. Warmth would drain away. Oxygen would disappear. The body would fail long before it could reach shelter. The air is there, but useless. Mars carries an atmosphere made mostly of carbon dioxide, and it is far thinner than the one surrounding Earth. NASA images show the result clearly. Dust drifts across open terrain beneath a sky that looks present but offers almost no protection. That realization changes how every structure is built. Protection cannot be expected from the environment. It has to be manufactured, sealed into walls, stored in tanks, buried beneath layers of soil carried and positioned by machines. A habitat partially covered in Martian dirt suddenly looks different. Not comfortable. Necessary. For a brief time, the buried shelter seems like an answer. Radiation is reduced. Temperature becomes easier to manage. The thin sky matters a little less. From a distance, it almost looks stable. Dust continues sliding past outside. The shelter remains sealed. And for the first time, survival appears as something that might be managed rather than endured. A repair light glows beside the airlock. Nothing outside has changed. Dust still moves across the ground. The buried habitat still sits beneath its protective layer of soil. But inside, something has... A filter warning appears on a maintenance screen. The shelter looked solid from a distance. Now it feels mechanical. Air passes through filters. Pumps move water. Batteries store power. Seals hold pressure where pressure does not naturally exist. Every part continues working quietly until one of them does not. The shelter is another machine. That realization arrives slowly. The safest place on Mars is also the place most dependent on uninterrupted function. NASA habitat studies repeatedly arrive at the same conclusion. Survival depends on closed systems operating day after day without losing control of air, power, pressure, or temperature. A warning light does not mean failure. It means maintenance. And maintenance creates a new problem. To replace a damaged component, someone may have to leave the habitat. The airlock opens. A suit is checked. Exposure begins again. Protection now requires contact with the environment it was built to block. The contradiction is difficult to escape. The shelter reduces danger. The shelter also creates tasks that lead directly back into it. A failed seal becomes more important than the landscape outside. A clogged filter becomes more urgent than the horizon. One broken part can suddenly outweigh miles of terrain because without it, the habitat stops behaving like Earth. The repair light remains on. The airlock waits nearby. And the work is not finished yet. The repair light eventually goes dark. Inside the habitat, the sound of machinery continues. Fans move air, pumps circulate water. Power flows through cables hidden behind walls. For a moment, everything appears under control. Outside, dust settles across exposed surfaces. A thin layer gathers on equipment. Another layer follows. Nothing dramatic happens. Nothing breaks all at once. Mars does not need a storm. The planet keeps taking small pieces. Solar panels collect a little less power. Filters process a little more contamination. Seals age. Materials absorb radiation. NASA long-duration studies repeatedly return to the same reality. Mars is cold, dry, dusty, thin-aired, and exposed year after year. The environment does not pause simply because a crew has arrived. The habitat grows dimmer as power margins tighten. People spend more time indoors. The safe area becomes smaller. That is the contradiction. Understanding the danger changes nothing about dependence. Air is still needed tomorrow. Water is still needed tomorrow. Power is still needed tomorrow. A cooling failure no longer threatens comfort. It threatens survival. A pressure leak no longer threatens equipment. It threatens lungs, blood, and consciousness. Outside, the landscape remains almost unchanged. Inside, the countdown continues. Red dust drifts across the buried habitat while the interior lights fall quiet, one section at a time. The planet keeps waiting. It does not need to hurry.